The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with the News Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. Welcome back. Hope you're all well. I've had a good couple of weeks. Last week I was wearing my non-cannabis lawyer hat. I was invited down to a panel in Brighton to talk about AI from an intellectual property perspective. It was a very interesting discussion, actually. I must confess, I don't feel that positive towards AI on a societal level. People are getting very excited about the business applications, which I kind of understand, but I worry more long term about what will happen to our creative skills if we're not exercising these muscles. We already have attention deficit disorder and are addicted to screens so much that we constantly need stimulation. I wonder what going further down this track will do to us all. Despite my worries, though, I did come away from the discussion thinking that this may perversely make us appreciate genuine human creativity a bit more. AI creations are easy to make, but they are so easy that anyone can create them. Therefore, there are no barriers to entry. Maybe we still do need human inspiration. Let's see what happens. Back to cannabis, though. The week before, I was at Cannabis Europa. Great to see so many old faces, many previous guests from this podcast. The sun was even shining for parts of it, which was nice. However, I've got to say the mood was a little bit somber. The first ever Cannabis Europa was at the Barbican 5 years ago, and I really remember it well. It was a real mood of optimism for the birth of a new, exciting industry. And it's fair to say that things haven't progressed as far or as quick as everyone was hoping for. There was a general feeling of muted optimism and quite a few broken dreams, sadly. We all hope for better days soon, I think. However, it was definitely a fun after party. Once again, this episode is sponsored by our good friends at Lumino. We're talking about Switzerland today. Lumino have recruited for a number of businesses in Switzerland, as well as mainland Europe. They've recruited for businesses in the plant touching, commercial and medical spaces, and they're always happy to chat. So as always, if you need help with HR recruitment, please do get in touch with them at luminorecruit.com, and please mention my name when you do. Now, on with the show. I'm pleased to introduce one of my favourite people in the space. We have Luc Richner on the show today. He is CEO and co-founder of Cannavigia. Cannavigia are a cannabis supply chain compliance and data platform, which we'll find out more about in a second. Luc, welcome. How are you?
Anush, I am great. Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, I must say.
Yeah, I'm glad.
You start in the industry, and there are certain voices you keep on hearing, and I'm sure you've heard this tons of times before. You're one of those voices.
Thank you.
And even before I started, and it's a pleasure, privilege to be here. And excited to share what we've been up to and what I've been up to. And let's see, maybe we'll find a bit out about where the industry might be headed.
Sure, and thank you for the kind words. Yeah, you and I have met a few times at different conferences and hung out, and so it's great to have you on the show finally. Where in the world are you today?
I am actually in Zurich, in our head office. Just got back from Thailand, and I'm here for, 6 more days until I see you in London again, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I know you've been jetting around the world a lot, so it'll be really good to get your views on all the places you've been to a bit later in the interview. But as is customary, we always like to start with a bit about you and your personal story. So if you can kind of give us a bit about your background and how and why you kind of got into this space, it would be lovely to hear that.
With pleasure. So I guess common denominator in my, can't call it career, in my life path was supply chain management, logistics, productions, quality control from different angles. I had the privilege to be born into a family that does global logistics, and the privilege and the curse, I guess, and started to dabble around that. Did my first experiences in that field, then pretty soon realized maybe it's not the path I want to take. And I ended up studying tourism. The day I finished my studies, I packed my bags and moved to Bali. Told myself, you know what, worst case, I'll add a couple of years of good life to my story. When I look back and explain and share it, those couple of years turned into 11 years. And the end became the longest I've ever lived in one place. And well, my affiliation with Asia also comes from being my first couple of years in Hong Kong and in Singapore, like the early stage of my life. So basically in Bali, did furniture productions, did trading, did global logistics, did things in and around tourism, had this beautiful epiphany of following a passion and opening a restaurant, which was kind of also the lead into what I'm doing now. Farm to table, 80 farmers, 540 products sourced across Indonesia, with the idea to then trade with those products and work with smallholder farmers and kind of figure out a way to also make the consumer understand that if you want to consume and purchase something from a proper, clean, sustainable supply chain where everybody earns as much as they deserve to earn, it's a bit more expensive in the end. And it's easy to just tell that everyone, as long as there's not that many people in a restaurant, but at some point, or in general, right, you got to find a way to communicate that, build trust. And that process learned very fast these different quality standards, quality seals, whatever you want to call them, certifications. They just didn't quite cut it. So I tried to bring purchasing or purchasing software and different parts together to kind of then, on one hand side, have control over the whole operation, but also to be able to share with the end consumer what really went into the product that they're consuming. So that was a couple of the building stones before I came up with the idea. Then at some point, I was always following the cannabis industry from a distance. I mean, I had my fair share of sympathy with the plant in university, and later on, just, suddenly there were these crazy numbers, Constellation Brands, 4 billion into Canopy, et cetera, et cetera. And I always thought once this goes global, meaning once this comes to Asia, I'll try to make my mark and get into the industry. And coming from that, international trade and standardization of harmonized system of how you declare things, and basically supply chain management and market accessibility, I thought, you know what? Where again, when this comes to Asia, I'll jump into it. 2018, then Thailand overnight, like they did in June last year overnight, the legalization. It's not a legalization. We'll come to that later, but they did the medical cannabis program. And in that kind of trajectory, I started to look at the international movement of goods. Pretty soon realized there is no international movement of goods, at least not in the transparent, compliant, scalable space and form that I was trying to look at it. And that was pretty, not frustrating, but it was kind of eye-opening, realizing like there's so much money going into this industry. The US, my co-founders, Elias was at the time, had a large operation in Alaska. Then I started to realize like the US system doesn't speak with the Canadian system, doesn't speak with the European system. There is no European system. What is the compliance level for medical? What is the compliance level for cosmetics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I ran myself kind of in a rabbit hole there. Rainy season in Bali is really giving, if you have an idea, because you'll have a lot of time on hand. And after really going through all that mumbo jumbo and realizing, look, I mean, there is some, when I say standards and systems, you will hear me say that quite a bit. One thing is both countries need to accept a certain basis, and then you need to be able to declare a good on the same site in the same way. And at that time, everything was done through bonded warehouses, which I have a long history in the family with, but it's not the way you scale any international kind of commodity or whatever it will be in the future business. So cut a long story short, I really was like, how is it possible that there is, no harmonization between the different, one thing is the regulatory framework. Some countries were looking at this, some countries at that. I mean, we'll just take the basics. Switzerland had 1% THC in industrial hemp. France had 0.2. And I think Italy went to zero point 0.6 at some point. I'm not quite sure, but it was even in Europe, just that one small thing was so out of balance. And of course, then if you don't have legal frameworks that kind of speak with each other, you're in exemption phase. The US just pushed ahead. Canada did their thing. I was like, you know what? I see there is something to be done in between all of that. And that was the basic inspiration for what was or is Cannavigia today. One big part was always, I used to say, if in the beginning the regulator will kind of determine what has to go into the flow of a product, but down the line, the end consumer will, based on understanding of what went into the product that he's consuming, be it cannabis or anything else, will become the regulator by making a qualified decision of what he puts into his body. So that was kind of like the two different motivators or inspirations that came together there. On one hand side, how can we build something that speaks the regulatory language between the different countries? And on the other hand side, how can we communicate that to the consumer that he, if you know the quality, it's not just the quality on the eye, right? What went into the product. And if you trust the process of what went into the product, you can do a more qualified purchase. And fun fact, we had the epiphany in the last management meeting, and we own now knowyourproduct.com and kyp.org. So I have a feeling in a year or two we'll speak about that. But anyway, so it's a little bit about me, a little bit about the inspiration.
That's great. And thank you for that background. I mean, yeah, provenance is very important. And the way you talked about that in terms of your experience in Indonesia, it's a very important aspect in cannabis. So it's great to see that that's sort of coming through in how you operate at Cannavigia. But supply chains don't come much more complicated than cannabis. So, you've taken on a big task. But I suppose on the flip side, because they're so complicated, there's a real value to your service that you offer us. I guess that's one of the things, right?
Yeah, well, we're young now, right? Might as well do the complicated things now and see where it leads us in the future. But definitely, when I went to my father, who's been doing logistics since, 45 plus years, and I explained him the idea. He said, I think it can work, but is that really what you want to do the next couple of years? Is that the battle you want to pick? And yeah, and I said yes, and here we are. And some things have worked.
Great. Well, I'm glad to hear it. And are there any other bits of Cannavigia that you kind of want to talk about now in terms of how it operates and who you're working with? I mean, we're here to talk about Switzerland, so we'll talk about the exact project in a bit, but maybe you can talk a bit about how you're supporting that as well.
I'll give a few insights about Cannavigia and who we are and what we do, and that will lead on into the next part of what we're doing with Switzerland. As I mentioned, there was this disconnect between the different declaration standards, whatever you want to call it. But in the end of the day, in the back end, it's always who does what, when, how, and why. And then you have different forms and different depth of what needs to be recorded to be able to be compliant, depending on where you sell your product to. And that's also another big issue in this industry. People just started producing without knowing where they sell the product to. So it's very clear. If you want to sell your product to Israel, you have Control Union Medical Cannabis Standard. If you sell your product EU GMP, it's clearly defined. In the US, so everywhere is a bit of a different aspect to it. But there's a common denominator underlying there, and that is always knowing what you do, recording it properly, planning, continuous improvement, etc. So the software basically is a quality management, quality assurance, quality control, a software set up like a management tool. So it's not just a track and trace where you move one step to the other. It goes quite a bit deeper, but I'm not going to get lost in that. If anybody is curious, please reach out, and happy to share more about that. So we looked at it again from this, at the beginning was this, the logistics is a broken part in the cannabis supply chain or the supply network. And my focus then, or our focus then, was if we can build a software for the supply chain, means everything plant touching, that will be accepted by the regulator as approving and a security and a compliance mechanism, then there is no reason why down the line that shouldn't also be a basis to enable other third-party services work with the industry. So on one hand side, yes, it's software, cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, seed-to-sale tracking, but we're actively pushing in the back is this acceptance of the industry, this, normalization of the industry. At the moment, if you want banking or any other services, it's a tough gig. But down the line, what we're trying to, the de-risking aspect through transparency. In cannabis, you had a lot of these vertically integrated, some beautiful words, right? Let's get billions of dollars from investors in Canada and the US and then vertically integrate the global supply chain, which is the the least efficient thing you can do. So I like to say what we do is more a horizontal integration, kind of like the way it's used to be in other industries. Basically, you have somebody that owns the genetics, does then, produces, the flowers with somebody that is specialized on that the manufacturing is specialized, instead of having it all in-house. And so the philosophy in the beginning was to kind of harmonize that process in between. And yeah, we ended up, my CTO has built in the past software for food traceability that he ended up selling to GS1. GS1 is a strong partner of ours. GS1 are those barcodes you have on every product, every Coca-Cola around the world. It's a global non-for-profit supply chain transparency standardization house. It's also Health Canada and, for example, FDA Thailand use that as a basis. And in Switzerland, every medical good that is being traded uses that as a basis. So on one hand side, we're like, okay, we have this ecosystem of cannabis that has way too much money and it doesn't really flourish in the way it could and should because of the different barriers that, not the market putting itself, but comes from the history of the product. And then our approach was, how can we normalize that based on other standards? How can we bring as many different standards together and therefore try to legitimize the industry? So one is Control Union, the other one is EU GMP, then you have Global Gap. Fun fact, the guy that co-wrote the Global Gap is Johan Zublin, sits in our advisory board since the early days. So we really try to not reinvent the wheel, but do it what we do based on a proven track record in other industries. Because I think a big issue of cannabis is we're really good at reinventing the wheel, but reinventing the wheel doesn't make your life or anyone's life easier. It just makes it, unscalable. Let's call it like that. And you had one question before, quickly. At the time, again, I was living in Indonesia and Bali, and I was like, okay, I am Swiss, born Swiss and raised in Asia, I like to say, but I knew I can only build this in Switzerland because of the Swiss brand, the Swiss, also the standard Swiss, the standing it had in the cannabis positioning globally and where it was going with what we're talking about in a minute. So I was like, I need the Swiss brand, I need the Swiss trust, the Swiss basis, and maybe some Swiss minds too. But that we can debate about if they're so much more powerful than other ones. But cut a long story short, this moving back to Switzerland, setting it all up here with the trust and the reputational bonus of this country was very great. And last little personal thing, in the time that we started it was just before COVID, 6 months before COVID, we founded the company. A couple of months, a year before that, we started thinking about it. I started my MBA in digital leadership a month before COVID, and then the world shut down, and we had all the time in the world to just, get shit done. And I think we did that. We have now customers in 18 countries, software is in 7 languages, team we have on 4 continents, team members, and we have a 10-year contract with the Swiss Health Ministry for the pilot projects for a recreational cannabis studies, it is in the end. And yeah, I think you have a few questions in that regard, if I recall that right.
I do. Well, firstly, congratulations. Congratulations. That's great to hear, and a great deal that you've got with the Swiss government. And we'll probably come back to the Swiss brand reputation aspect actually at the end. I think that's a really interesting aspect to talk about. But we are here to talk about Switzerland, and we had our good friend Ben on a few months ago, and we did talk a bit about what was going on in Switzerland then. The trials have subsequently started, and so I thought it would be good to get you back on and get your kind of reflections on how it's working and what are the things that are supposed to be happening and we'd like to see from it. So maybe if we take it from the very top, how exactly does the pilot project work, and what are the authorities trying to assess?
First of all, great. You had Ben Arn, our common friend here, absolute legend, one of the people that has spent, 2 decades plus doing everything he can to legitimize the industry. And I think this is very important that we have people that are focused in that regard. What is Switzerland doing? What is the whole idea behind? So in Switzerland, we have probably the most direct democracy in the world, and the people decide that they want to go in this direction. It almost happened 20 years ago, was in the end then blocked by our neighboring countries because they said you can't, cannabis tourism and so forth just created troubles. But fun fact, when I went to university, we bought cannabis in the shops, and the people that sold it to you explained it to you what it was. But it was not for consumption. It was for upcycling. It was, well, to air out the moths in your cupboard. So very always been a very creative industry that,
I like that.
was a blessing and a curse to itself sometimes. So Switzerland was always kind of very much harm reduction focused. The 4-pillar principle comes out of Switzerland. Thomas Kessler co-wrote that, also from Basel as I am. And so I think 2016 was the first time it was voted in that direction. In 2018, the government got the go to formulate a legal framework or something on that regards. At that time, we were very closely with the Swiss Industry Association that was very active or is very active. And also shout out to them, IG Hanf and everybody around here, but also to associations globally. It's very important that you in a bestly harmonized way, try to voice your opinion and bring reasonable solutions and not try to reinvent the wheel. But so with them and the regulator, there was this consultation phase of how this could happen, how this pilot projects in the end are a study under the UN single convention. You can either have cannabis as a natural medicine, which legitimizes you to, or which makes it legal in that sense to distribute under a natural medicine, or you can conduct a study. And Switzerland went the way of conducting a study. The study is a social, cultural, socio-economical study on how legalization can work. And in this part, I usually like to just drop a few numbers and why this is important, the way it was done, and why nothing else that has been done in the world so far really worked. I mean, we have now, after more than 10 years, legalization in the US. In Colorado, it's still 60+% illicit market. You just had 400 tons destroyed in Canada of overproduction. That is that's invested money that was not coming back as return. Why those were destroyed, quality issues, etc., doesn't matter, but definitely not the most sustainable model either, while still having a very high illicit market share. Then you have, of course, Holland, which are absolute magicians, 50 years of sale without production. I'm just going to leave that in the room there for everybody else to interpret themselves. Let's just say not a sustainable model either. And then there's really not much else there to draw numbers from. People say Malta, people say these other countries that are looking at things, but nobody really has figured this out yet. Uruguay, of course. So the way Switzerland went about this was, we're creating a legal framework that allows every stakeholder to come together and come forward and propose how they could see this going. Every stakeholder, we are the official partner of the health ministry. They sit on top and have to oversee the whole program. But then you have, the canton, which is like the state municipality. Then you have addiction board, you have police, you have the university that conducts the study. You have a qualified person, a study nurse, or somebody that is responsible for, because in the end, it's still the traffic, narcotics are being moved around. So you always have somebody that is in charge of that. Then you have, of course, cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, point of sale, and the consumer. And very important, it's a consumer. It's not a client. It's not a patient. It's actually declared as a consumer. So all those come together in a program and thought through program of how much will they consume, how much will they purchase, what are the timelines, and then there are some cornerstones, which I will share a little bit more in a second about some of the numbers. But basically, it's almost everything allowed, but you have to have a good thesis for it. I mean, you can sell edibles, you can sell shatter, you can sell, flour and so forth. And the nice thing that came together here, for example, Basel has under 4. I'm staying a bit vague because there are certain things that are public, certain things not. Basel has roughly a little bit under 400 participants, 9 pharmacies. Basel is the first project to be accepted. Sorry, first of all, Project Wheat Care in Basel was the first one to be accepted because they went in a small scale and a very easy to control supply chain, which is pharmacies. So there it is, 9 pharmacies, and you can purchase everywhere. There are some things have come out there, which were people in the beginning always bought the strongest. But with communication education, they move towards more balanced strains. I think that's a very nice outcome, short-term outcome.
It's good to
there.
hear.
But yeah, well, I think this just full force momentum once you have a choice and can really actually trust the product that you're getting and trust that choice. I think, more responsible consumption to be awaited there. And then you have, for example, Zurich is the second project that was accepted not too long ago, a bit over 2,000 customers, 21 points of distribution, points of sale. They are having social clubs, dispensaries, pharmacies. And in Switzerland, we have this thing called, tokenized. It's basically if you're an addict of heroin, you get methadone from a government facility. So in Zurich, they're testing all those different distribution methods or points of sales or whatever. And that hasn't started yet. So we don't have any insights there yet. But there's a much wider and bigger concept. Lausanne, Geneva is going into this full harm reduction through government points of sales. So why am I telling this like this and what do I really like about that? So these are 3 cities in one country the size of Switzerland, which is, very, very overseeable. And each city, each part of the world, each country has a different point zero to start with into going into this legalization period, phase, or whatever, or testing, or whatever you want to call it. But to figure out what is the best solution for which country is not here is a blueprint, it has worked everywhere else in the world, just go with it. So this testing phase, and again, these are paid. Consumption is paid at market price, so it's not a finance study that has kind of a wrong outcome on how the market could work. It's kind of like the first stage to test. It's a real qualified study, what I want to say, towards how the market reacts. And just seeing the first 3 cities that were accepted in Switzerland going so different directions, and there's a whole bunch of other ones coming very soon, lets me believe that every country has their own demons and their own chances and their own whatever hurdles that they have to go through. And so there isn't really a blueprint is what I'm trying to say. So I encourage, and especially after what we saw in Germany, it's very clear in front of the UN with pilot projects, you can start tomorrow and everything else will take a long legal process. So does the industry want to wait for this to move forward? Or are these pilot projects actually a very positive way to test the grounds and see what works best in which regions? And so that's why I personally really like that approach, because it's the only stakeholder-led market analysis, market study in how this could go further. And this is why I really like the approach Switzerland took.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's loads there, but yeah, I agree. I think this gives it probably one of the better chances to succeed because you're sort of normalizing it to a level within society before you sort of fully pull the trigger on a fully legalized system. And so, yeah, we're all very hopeful for the data that comes out of this. And do you know what some of the factors are? I mean, you said that some bits haven't been released, but do you know what some of the factors that they're trying to evaluate are and what the success and failure metrics are?
Well, every project, every program has their own, right?
Right. Okay.
So the one in Zurich which is the best way, which form of dispensing will people go for? In Basel, it's really just starting to see also, can we get them from a higher to a lower percentage? And we have to also keep in mind in Europe, in the center of this whole aspect is always harm reduction and not creating a new multi-billion-dollar industry. Even though there lingers somewhere out there a multi-billion-dollar industry that will be, hopefully legitimized at some point. But the first and foremost stage that we're in right now is the harm reduction approach. And so how can we bring people from, illicit flower that is sprayed CBD with I don't know what towards buying in a transparent way, and a dedicated point of sale. Will they also be part of it? A lot of hurdles that people thought would be hurdles will people actually sign up for this? But I can tell you, yes, within 2 days, both of those programs have been full. And one is just over 2,000 and one is just under 400. So yes, people want to come out of the shadows. People want to be able to, normalize this whole industry. And Switzerland, of course, they trust the government, which helps. Some other countries that maybe not quite the case. But in general, it's to test how can you reform, or let's say it like this, how can you not do the same mistakes like they were made in the 30s after the prohibition in alcohol? Because there's been some nice movies about what went wrong there, and it was a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. Thank you. And it's interesting to hear that the different cities have different rules, which I guess is a good and a bad thing, but hopefully that will give a slightly richer picture to the assessment. And do you kind of know what the next steps might be if it's successful? But actually, I forgot to ask you, how long is it running for? How long were the various schemes running for?
So the time window the government gave is 5 + 5 years. And now the different cities have different timelines. Some are 3, some are 4, some are 2 years. And with the idea that some of them say, look, in 3 years it will be legalized anyway. Some will say it will take longer. Some will say, let's do the first study and then we can always continue and widen and make it larger and so forth. At the same time, we have the Motion Siegenthaler, which is the parallel engagement by the people to have the government come up with a legal framework for legalization in cannabis. So those two angles that are being pushed or driven at the same time in Switzerland. But the pilot projects are 10 years. And with that data that is collected there can be a very quick turnaround into turning this into an actual regulations.
Yeah, and I guess so ultimately it is to see whether legalization could be a successful strategy at the end of it. So yeah, hopefully there's a big prize there. You mentioned a few of the shortcomings of other countries' legalization programs, and it's interesting, that's obviously great information. You don't have a kind of template that you can easily adopt, but you can see where other countries have gone wrong. I mentioned that you'd been traveling quite a lot and you'd recently been in Thailand, but you've been to lots of different countries. What are you seeing that's going on in the rest of the world? Are there any kind of interesting things that you're liking?
Well, I'm liking that the conversation is being moved forward, and I've been traveling a lot last year, 6 months of the year. Well, been everywhere except the States because they have their own battles to pick. My clear focus is Europe, Africa, and Asia because that's where I got my network and that's where I see a lot of things happening in the near future. They all have their own approaches, which is good and bad in some ways. Again, harmonization, I know it sounds like a big word, but the last thing we want is, the US and Canada have such different standards that they created that they probably will never be able to trade with each other except they start from scratch and build something new, which is their battle to pick. So, we see, developments in Southern Africa, South Africa and the countries around, Lesotho and Zim and Malawi and so forth. What I'm very excited about is Morocco, simply for the history of the country. And there is India, of course, which is just unbelievable, large player in anything they do. And I see two things happening at the moment. So one thing is this natural medicines. The Natural Medicines Act is something that has been pushed by the WHO. The MCDDA in Europe is in charge of formulating a more harmonized approach towards the regulation of cannabis. And as mentioned, it can either be declared under natural medicines or as pilot or studies at the moment. And there is this move from the WHO. They now in Gujarat made this natural medicine center, Ayurvedic, of course, being a big player in this, but also Thailand. In South Africa, they want to also declare it under the same circumstances. And so that is one approach of harmonizing a certain framework that doesn't allow international trade afterwards. And there is some prerequisites there. For me, the most dangerous thing at the moment is everybody builds a facility with the promise to export to Germany. Germany's big, but it's not that big. And let's stay on the rec side, because that's kind of the center of what we're talking about today. Thailand, June last year, just started the madness. And we've translated the software 6 months before that. We had a team member in Thailand 2 years, because I know that side of the world very well. And when things move, they move fast, and not always the most structured way, of course, but they do move fast. And yes, Thailand overnight allowed, decriminalized. They did not legalize. People have to very, very be careful with the terminologies they're using. It's a big difference. And they also legalized it, or decriminalized. They legalized the natural medicine, traditional Thai medicine part. But what happened now with this complete madness in the recreational side, that has no legal basis. And there is votes in 14th of May. There's two different parties that are in the lead. There will be a change on the top level. And, well, the big conglomerates are already in the space. Everybody's in that space in Thailand. So I don't think it will go away. And I'm not here to do speculative assessments of everything. It's just my personal opinion with everything I've seen and the people I talked to. We do also work there with some government entities and a lot of universities. And basically, they want to drive it forward, but in a way that it doesn't create more problem than it should. And what I like of Thailand is they created a market, meaning people, of course, like everywhere in the world, when cannabis comes, there's over investment into cultivation. And then, well, but we're not going to go into the mistakes that will always be made everywhere, because the selling of the dream. But Thailand at least also created a sale. And some other countries, North Macedonia, I think 60 or 70 licenses for production without export and without a domestic market. I mean, this is again a very Dutch model, if I would could call it like that. Somewhere in between, something has to happen that we don't want to speak about. So Thailand now has a chance to clean up. They will clean up. They're already cleaning up. But with a 0.0 that they will start, then that has seen the whole lot, from full boom to complete out of control to then find a regulating angle. We're again very closely contact there. I was just 2 weeks there, and I'm going to go again in a month or two. And the team there is growing. The challenges are immense, but I like the chaos of Asia. I don't know. It's someone's. For me, it's my calling. It's where I kind of grew up. It's what I grew into, and if you can maneuver that, then the world is your oyster. And I see myself very focused on that. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you, Luke. We kind of come to the end now. Unfortunately, could have talked a lot more about that, but good to hear a positive story from Thailand, because actually I'm hopefully getting someone on in the next few weeks to talk a bit about what's going on there. And it's a very interesting territory, particularly historically was quite a scary place to ever have any drugs. And so interesting that it's probably one of the leading markets, looking at this. So plenty more to learn there. But thank you so much for sharing all of your insight on Switzerland. And it's great work that you're doing with the Swiss government and supporting lots of other interesting businesses across the world. So yeah, look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you so much, Anush. And maybe 2-3 last words to add.
Yeah, please go for it.
What Switzerland is doing with the pilot projects in Germany will do with the Modell project. They can, not just theoretically, but they can be kickstarted in every country in the world, because the basis for that is there. So if anyone out there, feels like making their own program or talking about something, we're looking now in Portugal with people in France, Italy, and all around Europe. But the industry has a chance to kind of, again, in a very structured way, come together and propose something rather than sitting back and complaining that things didn't move their way. So I see the outcome in Germany very much for a chance for other countries around Europe or the world in that matter. And communication, exchange, and harmonization of approaches very much key to not overload the regulators' headaches, because they're already overloaded in this regards. So what am I saying with that? I think it's a great time to start formulate different approaches in different countries. And I'm very happy and keen to explore that further in any direction.
Brilliant. Well, I'll be putting all your contact details up when we post this show. So please do get in touch with Luc if you need to. But for now, Luc, thank you so much. I will see you next week in London at Cannabis Europa. Looking forward to having a drink then and catching up properly.
Very much looking forward to that. To you, all the best, and happy days.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. See you later. Cheers. Thanks again for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast. It will help me spread the good word on how this amazing industry is developing. I'm a commercial lawyer and I work with a number of cannabis businesses in the UK. If you need help with commercial contracts, data protection, employment, corporate, or other business legal needs, please do get in touch with me via LinkedIn or at anuj@canvas.global.